So first of all, thanks very much for joining us. It's great to see so many people here to hear more about occupational therapy at Griffith University. That's fantastic. I'm Professor Matthew Molyneux. I'm Head of Occupational Therapy here at Griffith, and so I work across both the Nathan and Gold Coast campuses because we offer occupational therapy on both of those two campuses at Griffith. And we also have, you will have seen Louise in the chat, and Louise is looking after the polls to give you a bit of an idea of these are some of the sorts of things that we do in classes, because this thing is called Collaborate that we're in now, and this is how we do some of our classes, or we've done quite a few this year due to COVID, obviously. So the plan for this short session is I'm going to give you a short presentation about occupational therapy and about the program here at Griffith University, and then there'll be time at the end for questions. And you can ask us questions about the program, about occupational therapy, and we also have some staff from from the university who can answer some questions if you've got specific questions about admissions processes and those sorts of things. So that's the plan. I'll just go ahead. I'm going to make the presentation. If you want to type some questions while I'm going, feel free to type them in the chat, and Louise will keep an eye on those, and we'll either stop throughout the presentation or we'll save until the end, depending on what the questions are. But we really want you to use this as a chance to ask lots of questions, get all the information you need. You can always get in touch with us again if you need to, but this is a great chance for you to find out the sort of things you do. Okay, so occupational therapy. Before we continue, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we all are, and they are probably quite different depending on where we're all based, and acknowledge and pay our respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging, and extend that to all our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It's something that obviously at Griffith we take very seriously, and is something that we are working hard on in occupational therapy, particularly to include more content about First Australian people, but also to support wherever we can First Australian students to come and join the community and be part of occupational therapy. Moving on to the program then. So first of all, why study occupational therapy? And Louise has asked a question about why you're interested. So I'm going to tell you a bit about why I think occupational therapy is a great idea. And if we have time, Louise might say something as well a bit later on. One of the things I think is fantastic about occupational therapy, and so I've been an occupational therapist for 30 years now, and I would not change my career decision if I had my time again. And one of the reasons is because it is so diverse. And one of the things I want to try and get across to you in the next 30 seconds or a minute is that lots of people think they know, well, A, a lot of people haven't heard about occupational therapy, and B, those who have heard about occupational therapy think about it as having that sort of scope of practice, okay, the sorts of things that OTs do based on what people have seen or heard. What we want to show you, if I can stay on the camera and you can see, I'm going to actually go off the camera, is that there's huge potential for you as an occupational therapist, particularly we think with a degree from Griffith University, because it's such a diverse profession. So first of all, just to give you a bit of an idea, some of the ways and the sorts of people that occupational therapists work with, we can work with people across the entire lifespan. So right from newborn babies right up until people who are approaching the end of their life, and everyone in between of all ages. We can work with, and this is probably where a lot of people know occupational therapy, we do work a lot with people who have an illness, a disease, or a disability. Okay, so that could be anything, someone who's living with schizophrenia, somebody who's had a stroke, and lots of others, children with cerebral palsy. There's a whole range of people who occupational therapists work with. But also occupational therapists work and are working more and more with people who may not have an illness, disease, or disability, but who may be marginalised or excluded from society. So that could be, for example, people who are refugees and asylum seekers, people who are living in poverty, people who are homeless, people who are members of other minority groups. That could be a whole range of things. And so one of the other ways that occupational therapists are working with all of those types of potential clients is we work with people on an individual basis. And again, that's probably the most common thing that people know about occupational therapy, is that if you're a child with cerebral palsy or a person who's had a stroke, we might have an individual session once a week or once a month, depending, but we would work on a one-to-one basis. Again, one of the things that occupational therapists are doing more and more, and we're focusing on particularly at Griffith, is having a much broader impact. And so we want our students to be thinking about how we could be supporting all of those people at the level of communities, whole population. So for example, what could occupational therapy offer all the residents of Queensland? What could we offer all the residents of Australia and even further? Okay. And because of all of that, occupational therapists work in a whole range of settings. And these are literally just 4 examples. Hospitals, communities, charities, private practice. You could work for the government. You could work for private consulting firms. There are a whole range of opportunities. Okay. What do we do with people? Occupational therapists are concerned with all of those things that we do every day. And we call them occupations, and that's why we get our name, occupational therapists. So that means that if you look at that list of types of people on the screen there, we could be working with somebody who is having difficulty washing and dressing themselves because of an illness or an injury. We could be working with somebody who's living on the street because they're homeless. We could be working with somebody who wants to get back into work after a long period out of work. Our key aim is, what are the occupations that person wants to do and needs and has to do, and what's stopping them from doing those. So it means we can work with people on looking after themselves, washing and dressing. We might be doing stuff around cooking, return to work. We might be doing hobbies. So for example, we had some students take one man fishing, okay? And that's one of the other reasons why occupational therapy is such an interesting career, because you can be doing all of those sorts of things with the people you're working with. So that's a little taste of occupational therapy. Depending on questions, we might come back and share a bit more about that. But happy to answer some more questions. So let's move on and think about occupational therapy at Griffith. So why? You know, there's several programs. We think there's a few things about Griffith that make our program a particularly strong program. So some of those things are the things I've just been talking about. We are really thinking about, where could occupational therapists be making a significant contribution into the future? So we are very clear that we want our graduates to be able to work in the current places that occupational therapists are working, but we really want them to be thinking about, where could we be moving into the future? And I'll show you a few ways that we think about that. The cohorts are relatively small, so each cohort is about 50 students on each campus. And the feedback we keep getting from students is they like having that small cohort. They build a really supportive network. We think we have some innovative approaches to teaching and learning in terms of, for example, the way that we include practice education quite early in the program. We use simulation, where a key strategy we use is active learning. So in all of the occupational therapy programs, it's not sitting in lectures and listening, it's doing stuff with other staff, with other students and staff in classrooms. And also, we're pretty proud that the people who are working here as academics are leaders in the profession. And so just a little taste of that is Louise, who is here, for example. She was recently inducted which is a very prestigious thing, into the Occupational Therapy Australia Research Foundation Academy, in recognition of her contribution to the profession, particularly in the area of research and supporting researchers. She is also editor-in-chief of the Australian Occupational Therapy Journal. Dr. Amelia Di Tommaso recently won from Occupational Therapy Australia, a national body, an early career researcher award for some of the research she is doing, and she's now continuing that with some research funding from the same organisation, actually, at Queensland Children's Hospital. And Bryony was one of our graduates, one of our first cohort. She was also awarded recently a national award for her contribution in her practice since graduating to working with children and family. So we think we have a pretty great team. And one of the benefits of the smaller cohorts, which I mentioned before, is we end up, staff and students get to know each other quite well. And so that's supportive, but also gets you into the occupational therapy community nice and early. Moving on then to think a bit about the program. So as I've said, we're at Gold Coast and Nathan programs. It's exactly the same program, and staff teach across. So you'll be meeting all the staff at some point over the program. There is some flexibility in our program at Griffith. You can study years 1 and 2 part-time, but years 3 and 4 need to be studied full-time due to placements. Okay. So if you want to or need to, you can take a bit of time in the first 2 years to fit things around what else is going on in your life, and then come and join us full-time in years 3 and 4. Just quickly, so the entry details for this year, was 80, or the equivalent of 86.85, and prerequisites are English and 1 science, which can include the new psychology course. Okay. All of this is on the web, of course, but we can answer some questions if you've got those. In terms of practice education, all programs have to ensure you get 1,000 hours, which is what we do, and we end up having a little bit over 1,000 hours. One of the things that we do in the program is we give you a mix of traditional and non-traditional settings. So some of that will be hospital-based or health service-based, and some will be in places where there are not even occupational therapists working yet. And we want you to get out there with support, of course, and see what occupational therapy could offer. And our practice education starts in year 1. So in trimester 2, in year 1, you get out and you're doing some practice education experience, which is unusually early. And placements happened around southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales, but actually way up north and out west in Queensland and in Australia more broadly. Just quickly, in terms of looking at what the program looks like, and again, happy to answer more questions about this. First year, we have youth students will study a number of courses with other health students, so things like anatomy, physiology, statistics, psychology, interpersonal skills, but you'll see that you start occupational therapy courses right from trimester 1 in year 1, and we get you thinking about occupation and the occupational therapy process, and we continue that into year 2. Into trimester 2. Year 2, then you do a number of public health courses, and so that's helping you to think about how could occupational therapy contribute to those big communities and populations. You do a course which is dedicated to First People's health and practice, and then you do some sociology as a good supporting discipline and knowledge, and then there are 2 occupational therapy courses as well, which focus in on more about occupational therapy and the process, but getting into more detail about what do we actually do with clients who present to us and are seeking some help with their occupational issues. So that's year 2. And year 2 has some practice education experiences, which could be a combination of things which you do independently and come back and discuss and debrief and feedback on. There's a fantastic simulation activity that happens in the School of Medicine that occupational therapy is part of, and students currently get an experience in that. And then there is also the potential for some other placement experience, maybe in aged care. In year 3, it is all occupational therapy courses, except for 1 elective, which you can choose if you wish to. The first half of the year is focused on working with individuals and includes university-based courses, but then a placement. Second half of the year is about working with communities and populations, so thinking more broadly, and there's another placement. This is one of our innovations in terms of it's a role emerging placement, which I hinted at before. You go somewhere where there isn't an occupational therapist, we provide you with support, and your job, you go in pairs usually, is to think about, well, what could occupational therapy offer in that environment? In year 3, we have the option for some students to apply to undertake an honours program, which is where you would undertake a research project for the next year and a half. So it's half of 3rd year and all of 4th year with members of staff. And that ends up often in a publication. So a number of our students have finished the program, our honours students finish the program with one publication published already, which is unusual, or at least one, maybe even two submitted and being considered for publication. And then fourth year, there's more occupational therapy courses. We have 2 placements, which are longer placements, practice education. Honours students continue doing honours. And then one of the other innovations in the program is we have a course on entrepreneurship, which is contributing to the community, is what it's called up there. That's essentially an entrepreneurship course designed for student occupational therapists, because again, we think that's one way of supporting students to think really broadly about what we could be offering as a profession to the world, but also in terms of job hunting and creating jobs, it's a way that you might see to be able to create your own job and not necessarily go and work in some of those traditional settings and environments. Okay. That's my brief overview. And so now I'm happy to answer questions, as is Louise. I'll stop sharing this for now, but we can come back to it if we need to.